Hi there. I'm Randy Patterson, a psychologist in clinical practice in Vancouver, Canada. This is Psychology Salon, a channel about psychological issues. If you like this kind of thing, click subscribe below. This extended video is about a concept I call Launchpad Parenting, which is mainly directed to the parents of young adults who are having some difficulty achieving adult independence. In North America, we often call this problem failure to launch, though I find that that's a bit of an insulting term for the challenge. In Japan, a somewhat severe form of this difficulty is usually called hikikomori. In Britain, young adults in this situation are often referred to as NEET, not in education, employment, or training. Many of these young adults are quite anxious or depressed, or both, and overwhelmed by the magnitude of the task involved in the transition from adolescent dependence to adult self-sufficiency. When I talk about this problem, a lot of people assume it's about getting young people to move out. And the problem is they're living at home with parents longer than expected. And actually, that's not it. There's nothing wrong with a multi-generational household. It's more about whether everyone in that home is functioning and contributing as an adult, if they are adults, and whether the younger adults in the home are moving forward in their lives or withdrawing inward to a limited set of activities, usually home-based, that seem to be more about marking time or avoiding the world. Almost all of the videos on this channel are relatively short, covering a single concept. This one is a little different. You can probably guess that running a YouTube channel is not my main thing. I see clients in my clinical practice. I write, I juggle responsibilities at Changeways Clinic, which I founded over 20 years ago now. I conduct training for mental health professionals, and I'm sure there's a few more things that I'm not thinking of at the moment. One of the courses that I've developed isn't primarily directed toward professionals. It's for the parents of young adults who seem to be stagnating at that gap between dependence and independence. It's called The Parent Trap, and there's a link to it in the description below this video in YouTube. It's at psychologysalon.teachable.com. Every now and then, I offer additional live talks for people in my courses. And recently, I provided one of those for people taking the Parent Track course. And I thought, so long as I'm thinking about these ideas, why not put them out on the YouTube channel for anyone? So this video isn't just an extended ad for the Parent Trap course, though some people who watch it might think they'd like to learn more about the subject. Fine. And it isn't complete information on the subject. This is a really complicated situation for families to find themselves in, and I cannot do it justice in a single talk. When I was contemplating this talk for people in the course, I thought, what are some of the key ideas that seem to be real sticking points for people? Ideas that often help people to begin moving their families forward. And I came up with, well, far too many of them, but I narrowed it down to 6. So in this talk, I'd like to review 6 core ideas for parents and families who find themselves in this situation. And these ideas are also relevant for young adults themselves. I also talk about these concepts when working with them on helping them find a more fulfilling adult life. So I suppose, in a way, this is for everyone, but I'll talk the way I did with parents who were in the course. Okay, 6 key ideas. So, what are they? In order, here's what I'll talk about. The dance, the ramp, the source of motivation, the childless parent, the rule of minimal change, and the Exxon Valdez. None of that makes very much sense right off the bat, but it will. Let's get started. Idea 1, the dance. When families are looking at this situation, it's natural to focus your attention on the person who seems to be having difficulty, and that's the young adult. The parents may have full lives, jobs, chores, interests, travel, friends, you name it. It's the young person who's spending most of their time at home, maybe not working or going to school, sometimes sleeping through much of the day and awake at night, sometimes not really doing too much to help out around the house, often with very few friends or romantic prospects, often spending a great deal of time online or gaming, sometimes avoiding the world through substances. And in most cases, this life, which in some ways might resemble the life of a much younger teen, doesn't seem to be that fulfilling. They have few or no responsibilities, but they don't seem to have that much freedom either. And they usually don't seem to be enjoying this restricted life, which isn't a huge surprise. Most people wouldn't. It's often a life governed more by avoidance than by approach. It's not that this is so great, but it's the only alternative because that, the outside world, seems so threatening. So naturally, the temptation is to focus on them. And how do we know it's an issue? Well, partly because they seem to be taking more care and more support, financial and otherwise, than their apparent capacity would demand. And in some cases, they're living a life that's much more narrow and restricted than the lives lived by people we might think of as being severely disabled. But think about that. They're receiving financial support, nutritional support, transportation support, residential support, all of that seems out of proportion. But if one person is receiving it, that clearly means that someone else is providing it. So what looks like a one-person situation is actually a two or more person situation. And we think of this as a dance that both the young adult and the parents are engaged in. Now, if you're the parent and you're not satisfied with this dance, it's tempting to focus on that young adult and get them to change their steps in the dance. Start looking for work, take a course, get out of the house, help out with the vacuuming, stop surfing the internet all night, get out of bed. Don't expect that I'm going to make you all your meals. You're trying to change your dance partner's steps. But there's a problem. They're not your feet, and you don't have control over them. And so it's inherently frustrating. You give all this advice, and often it's not bad advice. And the young adult doesn't take that advice, partly because they don't believe it, partly because that would mean abandoning this moderately comfortable position, and partly because it would mean facing the prospect of failure. And partly because obeying you would be the act of a small child, not of an adult. And the thing is, they actually are adults, and they know it. And adults don't just run around following the instructions of mom and dad. In order to stay adults, they have to resist those attempts to seize control away from them. So if you're telling them to get a job, the way to retain their autonomy is to resist that. In a way, staying dependent on family and those supports can be a way of asserting their independence. I'm not going to do what you tell me to do. Listen, every family in this situation is different, but in most, there's something of a power struggle going on. The parents are trying to push the young person forward, and the young person is digging in and pushing back. You're trying to move their feet, and naturally, they resist. So if we think of this as an unsatisfying dance, we can look at how one person can best change it. And the answer is not by changing the other person's steps. It's by changing your own. To some parents, that sounds like blame. This problem is all your fault, so it's up to you to change it. And that's not what we're talking about. Sure, parenting often has some role to play in the development of this problem, but regardless of whether that's true in any particular case, the situation now is what it is. And the best way to shift it is not to look at the other person's feet. It's to look at your own. Shift your own steps in the dance, and the dance inevitably changes. I'll give you an example. A parent once wrote to me telling me that they had a young adult who'd been at home, not working or going to school, and mostly playing video games. And because they weren't working, the parent had continued with the young adult's allowance from childhood. And in fact, they'd ramped up that allowance considerably. And they nagged and nagged their young adult to get a job, but no action. And learning about this idea of changing their own steps, they stopped talking about how the offspring should get a job. That wasn't working anyway, so why bother? But they shifted to their own steps in the dance, and they said, listen, each month this allowance is going to go down by 10%. And very importantly, they stuck to that. Now, they didn't talk about this. They didn't mention this in the note. But I can imagine that the young adult pressured them not to do this. But whereas before, the parent was feeling powerless because they were trying to change their young adult, now the young adult was trying to change the parent's steps in the dance. And that wasn't working either. Trying to change somebody else is hard work. The parent reported to me that within a few months of this, the young adult was looking for work. Well, that's great for the parent. What about for the young adult? Ultimately, early jobs are often not that satisfying, but adult independence tends to be. The dependence is not good for people in the long run, though it is typically the most comfortable thing today. So in this case, what changed the dance? It was giving up on changing the other person and looking at their own role in the dance instead and changing that. Now, that begs the question, how do I do that? What are my steps in the dance? And that's really individual. I encourage parents to look at all the things they're doing in this relationship with this young adult and just write them all down. To start off, what are all the ways you try to get them to change their steps? I nag them to get a job. I look up degree programs and I slide them under the door. I tell them to engage in self-care. I yell at them for not contributing. I nag them to take the garbage out. I lecture them on financial responsibility. And none of that is actually working. Okay, but what are your steps in the dance? Let's see. I provide accommodation. I give them money when they ask. I buy them the gaming supplies that I don't want them to use. I do the grocery shopping. I cook most or all of the meals. I do most of the household maintenance. I tiptoe around the house when they're sleeping during the day. I pay for their cell phone. I provide 24-hour internet. Okay, and then it's really important that most of that stuff does not change all of a sudden. Viewing the problem as an interaction rather than as a single pathological person is usually quite helpful. It opens the path forward. But to walk that path, that takes a few more ideas. So let's move on. Idea 2, the ramp. When a child is first born, they can't lift their head. They can't control their sphincters. They can't digest solid food. They can't even turn over without help. And parents help out with all of that. They move the child, lift the child, feed the child, diaper the child, move the child around, and everything else. The child's survival and care is all in the parent's hands. And what are we aiming for? Well, an adult who can take care of themselves, able to feed themselves, able to house themselves, transport themselves, and pretty much everything else. We're aiming for a world in which we can retire and move to the other side of the planet if we want to, or die, whether we want to or not, and the young person survives and hopefully thrives. So we start with complete dependence, and we're aiming for something approaching complete independence, where the son or daughter may get the odd bit of help from us, but they don't absolutely require it. In some families, the flow of support actually begins moving, at least somewhat, in the other direction, where the young person is doing some things to support the older person, taking them to appointments, cleaning the gutters, who knows what. It's a bad idea to have children expecting that reverse flow ever to take place, but it does sometimes happen. At minimum, we're hoping that they can fly on their own, and that if our meter expires, they can handle their life. So, join those 2 points up and look what you've got, a ramp. Bit by bit, some of the things we're doing become their responsibility. Initially, we diaper a child, and we don't expect any sphincter control. Eventually, we do potty training, and the child becomes responsible for saying, I need to go. And eventually, they go on their own. They handle it. At first, we bathe them, and eventually, that's their job. We wheel them around in a stroller, and then they walk under their own power. And then they can go a few places on their own, and then a few more. We might wake them up for school, and eventually, that's their job. We wash their clothes, and then we teach them how it's done, and they do it. We make every meal at the start, and then eventually they're getting their own breakfast, and sooner or later they're making Wednesday dinner for the family. We take complete care of the house, and eventually they take on a portion of the tasks to help out, maybe raking the leaves or mowing the lawn or taking out the garbage becomes their job, their responsibility, and no one does it except them. And then, if one day they choose to move out, it's not such a big adjustment because they already know how to handle a bank account. They already know how to cook for themselves. They already know how to do dishes and laundry and get wine stains out of a carpet and get out of bed when they don't really want to and keep their bills paid. A friend of mine once said that having a child is 9 months of saying hello and 20 years of saying goodbye. From the moment of birth, this child is moving steadily away from our care. So what happens in families with Launchpad issues? Well, sometimes parents don't really think about the ramp or the issue, They think of childhood as one category and adulthood as another category. I'll care for my child and one day he'll be an adult. So they may not regard parenting as an extended apprenticeship program for adulthood, which actually it is. Sometimes a parent never teaches a son or daughter how to cook or do laundry and never gives them any chores. And then somehow it's a bit of a surprise that they don't know how to do any of those things. The parents occasionally neglect the ramp, and now there's a big gap between where the young adult is and where they might need to be in order to be independent. I encourage parents of younger children to think about this ramp idea a lot. How can we gently and gradually and supportively and nicely transfer skills and self-care responsibilities to this young person who will eventually have to do it all on their own anyway? In every family, the ramp happens to at least some extent. We stop breastfeeding. We do potty training. We have kids help with washing up after dinner. But in some families, at some point, the ramp flattens out, and that progression stops. And the gap between where they are and where they could be just gets wider and wider and wider. Sometimes the ramp actually moves in the opposite direction, up instead of down. Sometimes a young adult goes off to college, lives in a dorm, has a reasonably independent life, and then comes home to live with parents. And the parents take over all the cooking and all the laundry and getting them up in the morning, and the responsibility of school have ended, but they haven't been replaced by anything else. So they're moving from the independence of a 19-year-old to the dependence of a 14-year-old. The ramp is going the wrong way. Sometimes the young adult is so resistant or fearful of independence or of personally responsible life that the parents just give up. They may go back to providing the care that they would normally give to a much, much younger child, and the ramp is absolutely flat, or there's a steady inward regression. So, how is all this helpful? When parents come into therapy, they're often contemplating two possibilities. The first is just declaring defeat and becoming the lifetime caregiver to the young adult, as though they were bedbound, giving up, in effect. The second is cutting them off and throwing them out of the house. In other words, ramp back to age 5, or turn the ramp into a cliff and throw them off it. Neither of these is a really good idea. The sudden change of being thrown out on the street is more than most young adults can navigate. And being treated like what we used to call an invalid is not the road to a sustainable or happy life. The young adult is typically fearful of the challenges on that road to independence. But this ship is slowly and steadily sinking, and they need to start rowing their own lifeboat. Being able to care for yourself to at least some extent is much more likely to lead to a fulfilling life than remaining dependent forever. So in our work with parents, we try to get that ramp started again, very gently to begin with, much more gently than parents think is necessary. I talk a lot about something I call GPR, Graduated Parental Retirement, gently scaling back on little bits of their support for dependence. Maybe giving up on breakfast service, or going out for dinner with your spouse or romantic partner or friends, what have you, without leaving a full meal ready cooked in the fridge. In most cases, the total amount of support stays the same, but it shifts from support for dependence to support for independence. For example, rather than spending an hour making roast chicken for them, we spend maybe an hour and a half showing them how to roast a chicken for themselves. Rather than driving them everywhere, we co-fund driving lessons. Rather than doing the laundry, we invite them to do it with us so they learn how. Now, sometimes the ramp has been flat for a decade or has been moving up instead of down. We might not be able to give it 10 years to get it where it needs to be. In an ideal world, the voyage from complete dependence to relatively complete independence is 20 years or more. But if our young adult is 25 and they're at the independence level we might expect of somebody who's 15, that ramp may need to be steeper than it would have been if we'd had slow and gradual progress all along. But it cannot be a cliff. We need to look at all of the gaps and gently begin filling them in, or, to put it another way, pulling back the training wheels on our young adult's bicycle bit by bit by bit. Idea 3, the source of motivation. We do a lot of things as human beings. We go to the dentist, we buy groceries, we work, we study chemistry, maybe we write music, we vacuum carpets, we cook food. But doing all of these things requires a degree of energy. We have to get up off the couch to do them. We need some kind of motivation. Why would I go get water and bring it back here unless I was thirsty? Motivation is a complicated subject, but we can reduce it down to 2 primary kinds of motivation. The first we can call intrinsic motivation. This is where the activity grabs us in some way. Simply doing it is so interesting and rewarding or fulfilling that it doesn't matter what the outcome is. Maybe you love architecture so much that you'll go on architectural tours when you're on vacation, and you'll read books on the subject that nobody else is interested in. Architecture is your passion. Our society is obsessed with this idea of passion. Find your passion. Do what interests you. To have any direction in life, you need to know what your passion is. And if you don't, then that's job 1. But there's a problem with this. Imagine you were to sit down and write out every single thing you did yesterday. You got out of bed. You brushed your teeth, had a shower, rode the bus. You sat in a boring meeting. You worked on a project. You found lunch. Everything, every minute, if you were to write it all out, then I would have you imagine that you put all of those things into 2 categories. One category is things you did because you just like doing them. Maybe that special project of yours. Maybe the warm shower. Maybe the chocolate that you had after dinner. Maybe that architecture book you just bought. And the other category is everything else. Stuff you did for some other reason. Just needed to get done. Maybe you had that shower so you didn't smell bad at work. You sat in that meeting because someone put you on the committee and you're paid to do it. You went to the grocery store because you were out of food. This second kind of motivation we can call adaptive motivation. We do it for some kind of outcome. I bought groceries so I could eat. I fixed the faucet to avoid a big plumbing bill later. I went to the dentist so my teeth don't fall out. I don't have any great passion for sitting in a dentist chair. I needed to do it to get something else I want, good teeth. So if you put everything you did yesterday into those two columns, which column do you think would be longer? I'm guessing it's the adaptive motivation column, things you did because they needed to get done. You don't have any great love of vacuuming or commuting or flossing your teeth or washing dishes, but you do them. And if you think back to your own entry-level jobs, you had no great love of flipping burgers or filling warehouse orders, but you needed money and you needed habits that would serve you later in life. And frankly, the reason they paid you is that you didn't have enough intrinsic interest to do those jobs for free. Your pay was in lieu of passion. Well, okay, fine. So what has this got to do with Launchpad problems? Well, a lot of people have heard all these messages about doing what feels right, living your best life, and following your passion, and they've bought it. And who does this more? Parents or young adults? Well, some young adults really do talk about, I don't feel like doing my own laundry, or I just have no great interest in cooking. Eating is okay. Cooking, I could do without it. Or I'd rather have my whole day free than work in some coffee shop. They've been taught that moment to moment, their actions should be based entirely on intrinsic motivation. And that's what's holding them back, because that's not anybody's life. But actually, that extreme stance is not all that common. In my experience, it's more often the parents who are working with the intrinsic motivation idea. And of course, that sounds wrong, because their life isn't about doing what they feel like every minute, but they're struck by the lack of passion and drive and interest in their young adult, and they're hoping to cultivate it. So the thinking is that they'll create a very safe, very secure, and very comfortable environment with no demands and no expectations. And out of this lovely cocoon, intrinsic motivation will come in the young adult. The young adult will find that drive, realize what they want in life, and then feel compelled to go get it. And that is a great idea, perfectly reasonable. But I've never seen it work. I think there are two reasons for that. First, I think we discover our passions out in the world. We do not find them inside a cocoon. No one ever sat on the couch long enough that they suddenly had the thought, oh, I know what I would want to do with my life. It just doesn't happen. Second, most of the things that a stuck young adult needs to do have nothing to do with passion. They're in that second column, adaptive motivation. They need to go to the dentist, which they've been avoiding for 5 years. Not because they love the dentist so much, but because their teeth are problematic. They need to overcome their fears about public transit, and not because public transit is so thrilling, but you need to be able to ride it if you're going to get anywhere. They need to work on their resume. They need to rehearse, how do you do a job interview? Not thrilling for anybody. They need to get their alcohol use under control, perhaps. They need to start doing at least some of the chores in this house that they share with other people. They need to do their own laundry. No great passion for that. Passion has nothing to do with these things. Even if by some miracle they discover their great life, passion, it's not going to be emptying the dishwasher. Okay, so fine. Waiting for my young adult to discover their passion for mowing the lawn is a lost cause. Fine. What do we do instead? Well, first, many parents need to look at their own role in the dance. In many cases, they have been systematically removing all sources of adaptive motivation. I don't need to get money to pay my cell bill because mom and dad pay it. I don't need to cook because when I don't, the food shows up anyway. It's better that I don't know how to do laundry because I get the laundry done for me. And why on earth would I take an entry-level job when I can just ask for the money and have it handed to me instead? Once that becomes clear, then parents need to think back to the ramp idea. How can we gently scale back so that a small vacuum appears in the young adult's life, a gap that they can grow into? If you truly believe that they're capable of learning how to do laundry, then you could stop offering to do it for them. If you don't think they need breakfast delivered to them on a tray, then you could kindly and nicely let them know that all the makings of breakfast are available in the kitchen. If you don't think it's reasonable that a 28-year-old has your credit card, then you could ask for it back or cancel it and get a new one and keep the number to yourself. This must not be punitive. This is not about how bad they are for taking advantage of you. You were the one who let it happen. It's about your confidence that these are things they can manage themselves. Once you wiped their bum, it would be disrespectful to do that today. And maybe it's disrespectful and unhelpful to treat them as someone who can't handle their own breakfast. None of us do our taxes or go for blood work or change the oil in our car because it's so fascinating. We do it because it needs to get done. We have a hunger for the tax authority not to audit us, to be healthy, to have a car that doesn't break down. That desire or hunger, if you like, is adaptive motivation. If we knew the chauffeur would take the car in to get the oil changed, we would probably never do it ourselves, and we would never learn how. As parents, the need is to gently pull back, respecting the potential of this young adult, and provide that vacuum space for them to grow into. You cannot eliminate all their needs and expect that intrinsic motivation will be all they need. It isn't all we need. We rely on adaptive motivation for most of what we do. It's not fair to expect them to do all of the tasks of life out of sheer force of will or fascination. So we come back to that idea of graduated parental retirement that I talked about earlier, doing a bit less and a bit less, and leaving those tasks for the young adult. And it's about there that I get objections from people. What happens if they don't do it? We've had a family meeting and they've agreed to be the person who takes out the garbage, and it's not happening. What do? What you do is you go back to your own steps in the dance and you look at your own contribution. For example, tonight you're making dinner. And some of what you do, your end of the bargain, gets contingent on them living up to their end of the bargain. But it's done very nicely and without nagging. Dinner's about ready. I'll serve it up as soon as the garbage is done. And you wait. And yes, while the dinner gets cold, that's fine. You'll live. You control yourself, not them. And if you wait long enough, then you eat right there at the stove. And you do not save the leftovers, but you kindly and nicely point out the things in the fridge that they could make for themselves if they want. If it's their night to make dinner and they don't, then you accept that kindly and nicely, and you go out for your dinner, even if you don't really feel like it, and you do not make dinner the next night. Oh, but that's not unconditional caregiving, you might say. You're right, it's not. And that leads us to the fourth idea. Idea 4, the childless parent. When I'm seeing parents of young adults in this situation, I always listen carefully to the words they use. And they will often talk about their child. My kid. And I'll do something that strikes some people as a bit passive aggressive. Kid? What kid? What child are we talking about? Is there a child involved here? There are no children. What would it be like to face the truth? You once had a child, but you don't have one anymore. There are no children in this home. No kids. All there is adults. And chances are, you will never have a child again. That part of your life is over. I haven't said anything that they don't already know. Their son or daughter is 24 years old. They know that, but they use the same word, child or kid. Now, okay, to some extent, that's natural. It's just the language we use, but it can also reflect our thinking. We're viewing this adult as a child, and that perspective may cause us to treat them like a child, and that is not helpful. When you are a grown man or a grown woman, it is not helpful to be treated like a 10-year-old. One of the reasons for this is that you can clearly remember them as a child. It seems like only yesterday you remember carrying them within, or pushing their stroller, or helping them through toilet training. It feels only natural to tell this 30-year-old to wear a sweater when they go out because it might be cold. There's something almost universal in this for parents. But if a parent has this unconscious idea of their son or daughter being a child, they will be more likely to treat them as one. And what do we do for children? Well, we don't expect much from them. We make their meals, we wash their sheets, we pay for their toys, we drive them where they need to go. We certainly do not charge them rent, and frankly, it's illegal to expect them to work. So parents can automatically do what that word, child, implies. They can parent. They do the laundry, they make the food, they protect the offspring from all consequences. They expect little and they fund everything. But although all of this is done with good intent, it is destructive to the autonomy of the adult. Why? Because there is no child. Sometimes this stance sort of comes from a hidden fear on the part of the parent. I've been a mother or father for so long that I don't really know who I am apart from that. If I'm not a parent, first and foremost, what am I? What does a post-parenting life look like? Parenting becomes your identity, and giving up the idea that you have a child means losing at least some of that identity, becoming less needed, maybe becoming irrelevant. If this is going on inside, and if it's not examined consciously, it can lead you to maintain and defend that identity. I need to continue functioning as a parent because my child is still a child. He needs his dinner made. He needs me to pay for his cell phone. He needs me to wake him up in the morning. And he doesn't have what it takes to make his own lunch or hold down a job or contribute. So what's the goal here? Well, it can be helpful to have a way of thinking about this that can help parents figure out what is reasonable. It's not perfect, but nothing is. Ultimately, we're moving from a parent-child relationship to an adult-adult relationship, peers. So I invite parents to ask themselves, what if this wasn't your son or daughter living with you? What if you were 3 adults or 2 adults sharing living quarters? Because, you are. What if this was a boarder? What if this was a roommate? What would be fair? What would reasonable expectations be like? Now, this exercise isn't perfect because you aren't just roommates. So you can't just take that exercise and do exactly what it tells you. Certainly not all of a sudden, but it is what we're working towards. And doing it can help parents see with more clarity just how far away they are from that. The truth is, you are all adults. But the relationship is more like parents with a very young child, and that shift needs to begin taking place. Remember the goal of parenting, which is to prepare this young person for the world. If you're a Martian looking at things from the outside, many families seem to be preparing their adult for a world where they have no duties, where they have no responsibilities, where there is a chef, a chauffeur, a laundress, and other staff working for them, which probably isn't the case. One day, this adult may indeed be living with a partner or with roommates. And if they've existed their whole life in a world where groceries simply appear and cooked meals just happen, and laundry appears folded on their bed, and bathrooms seem to clean themselves, and house cleaning isn't necessary, then naturally that will guide their behavior, even if it's consciously obvious that none of those things are true. We may be raising them for a world that they are not going to be living in. And they will find it very difficult to adjust to the world that they will actually inhabit. We may be setting them up. We need to work toward that world of servantless equality, because that is the world they will most likely live in. Parents need to retire, inch by inch, gradually edging toward the exit. Idea 5, the rule of minimal change. Okay, so a lot of parents can see the logic behind a lot of what I've been saying, but the task can seem enormous. Here's fully functioning adulthood, and here's where we are now, and oh my God, is that gap ever wide? So it's tempting to think, we need to make some major changes right now. But there are 2 problems with this idea. First, the young adult may not be able to manage that shift. We're hoping that the pullback of excessive caregiving will provide that helpful vacuum into which they can grow. We want to cultivate adaptive motivation. But if that gap is just too big, it becomes paralyzing rather than helpful. Second, if the change is too big, parents can't stick with it. They get a lot of pressure from the young adult and they begin to doubt themselves. Is this really a good idea? Maybe I'm being too harsh. I just feel too guilty. I can't stand this. And they abandon the new idea, the new way of doing things. Most families have a long history of big new policies that are announced and they fall by the wayside within a day or two. I'm not going to cook dinner anymore. And then after 2 days, things are back to normal and you're cooking all the dinners. And the young adult learns, listen, you don't have to pay too much attention to this stuff. Many parents have been training their offspring for years that when they say things, the actual meaning is zero. You can ignore it. So what we usually try to do is find changes that are so small that the parent can keep them going. And the young adult should be able to manage them eventually. If they're small enough, the parents will usually think that these changes are ridiculous. They're so trivial that they're not helpful. They're not going to get us anywhere. And that's the sign that we're doing about the right thing. Imagine a family that somehow has gotten into the habit of delivering 3 meal trays a day to their young adult. This isn't common, but it has happened. And the young adult refuses to eat at the dinner table. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. A parent is making up the tray, going to the young adult's room, knocking, and putting it on the floor by the door. Our first step might be to do exactly that, but with one change. No knocking. Now, that's not very helpful. You still have to make up the tray, go over there and set it down. The knock is the least significant part of the whole process. Not doing it doesn't save you any time or effort at all. How stupid. But it's a baby step back, and that is exactly what we're after. Baby steps. The next step might be to leave it at the top of the stairs, or to let them know that there's lots of breakfast stuff and they're absolutely welcome to make whatever they like, but you won't be doing a breakfast tray. If the parents tell anybody else about this project, they're going to get a lot of flack. That's ridiculous. Just cut them off. Food's on the table. That's it. The friends might be right, but the friends don't understand how change works, and that is gradually. Parents might think, my gosh, I'm spending thousands of dollars a month on this son or daughter, and our first goal might be to continue paying the basic amount on the cell phone, but not the overage charges, not the excess. Oh, that's not significant. Yes, it is. It's a step back, one of many. What we do not want is a leap back. We want a step. And then once we've done that, another step. We need to turn a corner in this relationship. But we will not do it with a sharp right turn. We will do it degree by degree. And that brings us to the last of our 6 points. Idea 6, the Exxon Valdez. The Exxon Valdez was an oil tanker navigating Prince William Sound in Alaska. And it wound up running aground and spilling 10.8 million gallons of oil into the ocean, fouling the area for decades. But how does something like this happen? Ships do have steering, after all, and maps. All you need to do is point it the right way and go. What is the problem? Well, as you might imagine, it's trickier than you think. Those ships are big and heavy. And that means they have a huge amount of momentum, especially when they're filled with oil. Once you've got them moving in one direction, it's hard to shift them to another course. So imagine, what happens if you're on the bridge of the Exxon Valdez and you turn the wheel? Answer? Nothing for a long while. If you're up there, you'll think, oh my gosh, it's broken. It's not attached to anything. Nothing is happening. And then eventually the bow begins to shift degree by degree. It can take 10 kilometers to make a turn, apparently. And that's why the narrow passages of Prince William Sound are so difficult for large ships. Okay, so what's this got to do with anything? Families have momentum too. Many of them have been drifting for a long while. So you get behind the wheel and steer, and what happens? Nothing. You might think that the comparison with the Exxon Valdez isn't fair. No one in the family weighs as much as a supertanker. But it's actually a bad metaphor for another reason. Families turn slower than supertankers. Turn the wheel on a family, and it can be weeks before the direction begins to shift. And this is a central problem in these families with Launchpad problems. Parents decide, okay, we need to do something here, and they make a change or decide a new policy, and maybe they even put it into effect, and nothing happens. They stop knocking at the door when they drop off breakfast, and the young adult just skips breakfast. The tray goes uneaten. Well, that wasn't what you were after. Maybe they're going to starve to death. So you switch and you try something else, and that doesn't work either. So you give up on that bad idea and you do something else, and nothing seems to work. Many parents are frustrated not because they haven't tried anything. They're frustrated because they've tried all kinds of things and nothing has worked. They flip the wheel this way, nothing. So they flip the wheel this way, nothing again. They put it in reverse, nothing. Nothing works. And all they need is one more word. Nothing works quickly. If you're going to make a change, the effects won't usually show up for a while. This does not necessarily mean that the change was a bad idea. It may mean that it will take time. I wrote the Assertiveness Workbook, and one of the key principles in that book is that whenever you set a new boundary, the person you set it with is going to push back against that boundary to see if they can get you to take it down. So whenever you change things in a family, you're going to get a lot of pressure to change back. If you cave in, you've communicated something. So listen, if I ever set a boundary with you, push me real hard and you'll get your way. This is not a good message to give people. Obviously, they will simply push harder next time. For example, if you say, I'm not going to give you money anymore, they will push hard. They will argue, object, get angry, tell you how unreasonable you are, maybe what an awful parent you are, and they may stomp around the house being completely unreasonable. You might think, oh my God, the whole point of this was to make things better. This is worse. I cannot handle the pressure. And then you give up and you try something else, or you just cave in altogether. But change needs to be made, and it needs to be left in place long enough for a supertanker to turn. And that is an anxiety-producing period because you don't really know if it's ever going to turn. And this is why these changes need to be carefully thought through and planned. And if there's more than one person involved, say if there's two parents, they both need to be on board. One cannot say, I will loan you up to $200 a month, but no more than that. And the other slips them cash whenever the first one isn't looking. That is profoundly destructive, both to the relationship between the parents and to the young adult whose independence is being undermined. So if a change is going to be made, it needs to be small enough to be sustained. And people need to be able to know that it will not shift things overnight. So, those are 6 key ideas: the dance, the ramp, the source of motivation, the childless parent, the rule of minimal change, and the Exxon Valdez. There are more ideas than just those 4, and I talk about some of them in my course, The Parent Trap. My hope is that even without that course, however, I've provided some thoughts that may be useful. Keep something in mind. This is just someone talking who has never met you or your family. This is not therapy. I don't know any of the particulars of your situation or the situation of your young adult. Any of these ideas might be completely inappropriate in your case. That's why it can be so useful to seek out the help of a qualified psychologist or other therapist to help you through this very difficult family situation. YouTube is not a substitute for care. And frankly, don't put your faith in most of what you see on YouTube. How do you know I have any idea what I'm talking about? Use your judgment, and really, I strongly recommend getting personalized help. There are other videos on this channel on the psychology of everyday life. Click the subscribe button for more. I also have an online course site, as I've been saying, psychologysalon.teachable.com, with programs for professionals and for the general public. And my books, How to Be Miserable, 40 Strategies You Already Use, How to Be Miserable in Your 20s, and the Assertiveness Workbook, are available from online booksellers. Thanks for watching.